Welcome to the Colts is King podcast. I'm the Duke, and here's my co-host, Rambling Bones.
Hello again.
And today we're going to ramble through 1943's Ghosts on the Loose. But first, Mr. Bones, what is it that we do here?
Here we talk about cult movies, those movies outside of the mainstream that you see and you have to share with your friends, and they have to share it with their friends, and, well, a little cult forms around them.
There you go. And this month we were taking requests. So our second requested movie is Ghosts on the Loose. This is an East Side Kids movie, which I'll explain more about them in a bit. And this was requested by Carol. Say hi to Carol, Bones.
Hello, Carol. Thank you for your request and your patronage to our comment section.
There you go.
We appreciate the engagement.
The real troopers. So, this movie features the East Side Kids, and we'll talk more about them individually, but basically this was kind of like a comedy troupe, almost. A collection of kids, and they're basically known for, they're like teenagers who are like wisecracking, kind of like lower income, like, you know,
they're
wise
like
guys.
Older versions of the Little Rascals, almost. A little more like the Three Stooges, but if they were teenagers, maybe.
Little, if you cross-pollinate between, like, you know...
It's a lot of different things altogether, I guess.
But yeah, you're in the same kind of genre there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually the 14th film in this series. And this one features Bela Lugosi.
This is our first time, I believe our first time, talking about Bela Lugosi on this show.
Which does seem like an oversight.
But before we get deeper into the finer details, what is the plot? It's not terribly heavy on the plot, but what is it?
So it's basically like this. It opens up with the East Side Kids, and they're preparing for a wedding. One of them, Glimpy, sister is getting married, so they're preparing for the wedding. But her new husband, Jack, has recently bought a house in the suburbs. Dirt cheap. Doesn't know why, but it was a good deal. Only be interrupted before the wedding because somebody wants to buy it for a large sum of money. It turns out that this house is supposedly next to a house that is haunted, except that it's haunted by Nazis who have a counterfeiting ring in there and are trying to scare people away so they won't realize that they're trying to use it to print propaganda.
Yeah.
Which sounds like this is kind of like a Scooby-Doo plot, but it's because Bela Lugosi literally and his henchmen are trying to scare off people by making them think the house is haunted. But this, of course, predates Scooby-Doo, so...
Yeah, and so you could almost just break this movie into two halves. First half is the wedding and the preparing of the wedding, and the second half is the kids. They mistake that which house is the haunted house and which house is the house that Jack is moving into. And their thinking is we're going to go and we're going to fix up Jack's house for him before him and his wife arrive there. And they end up at the house that's supposed to be haunted and full of Nazis, and they try to fix that house up.
Right. Largely by stealing furniture from their actual house.
Yeah.
Because they're just a bunch of lovable scamps.
Not the brightest of lovable scamps, but lovable scamps. Nonetheless.
I think that's as much really as there is to say about the plot. Would you agree?
Yeah, only an hour and 4 minutes.
Yes, just barely a movie at an hour. Not quite as short. And of course, it featured the East Side Kids. We should probably just start right in with talking about them so people have some context for this movie.
Yeah. First, I'd like to say, on the topic of it being an hour and 4 minutes, the East Side Kids movies were pumped out.
Yes, well, and as we're going to see, the East Side Kids is kind of in a series all of its own.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were like 20-some East Side Kids movies.
I think it was more like 22, but...
That's 20-something.
Yeah, 20-something.
Hence the something, Bones.
It might be 21, somewhere nice in the middle.
22 sounds right to me. But the East Side Kids weren't actually always the East Side Kids. This all started with a play called Dead End. This was produced in the 30s, and it was basically about a bunch of like juvenile delinquents. And it was actually kind of like more of a serious play, you know, kind of showing like the squalor and the violence or whatever. It's not something I've seen. But what is important for this movie about it is It was adapted into a movie in 1937, and the actors from the play were brought in to the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and the movie was a success. So much so that one of the producers turned these kids into the Dead End Kids, okay? And they would constantly appear in movies together. Well, as this got more popular and went on, this evolved into the East Side Kids, and I believe this was producer Sam Katzman's project.
Well, and before even they were the East Side Kids, there was another project, and I'm pretty sure it was a rival project to the Dead End Kids called the Little Tough Guys.
Yes, yes.
And the East Side Kids is like, what if we combined actors from both?
Well, and then it didn't even stop there. This later turned into the Bowery Boys once they became adults, though some of them are already adults by the time they're East Side Kids, but by the time they're no longer convincingly teenagers, right? And they had a series of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, members came and went throughout the thing, but two of the members we're going to talk about today were actually here since the beginning of the Dead End days, and that's going to be Leo Gorsey and Hunts Hall, who play Muggs and Glimpy respectively.
Mm-hmm.
They actually were originally in there as Dead End Kids, and they would both go on to later become Bowery Boys. And I want to say every iteration was fairly successful. I think if you take from the Dead End to the Bowery, you get about 89 films.
Just sort of skimmed their IMDb page, and I noticed quite a few roles, but a lot of it is, oh, they're playing the same character over and over and over and over and over again. And then it's, oh, well, this is a different character, but it's, different era, whether it's them being the Bowery Boys or Dead End Kids. So,
Well, and from what I gather, a lot of times the names might have changed, but the characters they were portraying were more or less the same.
yeah.
Leo plays Muggs, and Muggs is like this, he's kind of the leader of the group, and he's one of like the ones who's always prominently featured. And he's like the wisecracking leader, and he like bosses the others around, and he's famous for all of his various turns of phrases, such as, you need to get those eyes checked, you need to go see an optimist.
Yes.
It's that kind of thing 24/7.
No, it is very, very snappy dialogue, but unlike in The Giant Claw, where the snappy dialogue doesn't land and proceeds to go on forever, this movie's snappy dialogue is actually rather enjoyable, I would say.
No, Muggs' character is always super enjoyable, and I love like all the various phrases he comes up with, and everybody plays off of each other well. In fact, you don't have to know all the references to enjoy it because it's one joke after another, but there's a lot of side references in there that are funny.
Mm-hmm.
At one point when he tells the police that, so he wants to get a police escort for the wedding, which they can't afford necessarily, so he tells the police that there's going to be some sort of like criminals in the area, and when they ask, he says Katzman's Mob, which is the producer of all of these shows.
No, that's interesting. I will say this also, the East Side Kids are the best part of the East Side Kids movie. There's like Jack and his wife Betty, who aren't really important. I mean, they're characters, but they're not super important. And whenever the movie transitions to something about them, it's like, yeah, I don't care. Go back to the silly kids.
Well, especially since, I mean, this is a comedy. I think it was listed as a horror comedy, but it's really more of just a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up. I mean, Bela Lugosi does a little boo here and there, but
Here's actually my main complaint is, I think, going in with the name Ghost on the Loose, I was thinking something like Abbott and Costello's Hold That Ghost, and I think I would have liked them to get to the haunted house sooner. I want more haunted house shenanigans, and I want more Bela Lugosi haunted house shenanigans.
Yeah, I feel like it could have leaned into its premise a little more.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to go through every East Side Kid, but there are three that kind of drive the story in this one. So Muggs is one, Glimpy is the other, and he's kind of a bit dim-witted, always getting himself into trouble, kind of lazy, and it's his sister who's getting married. And then the other one I'm going to talk about real quick is Scruno, who was played by Sammy Morrison. Real quick to talk about Glimpy, he was played by Hunts Hall, who's most, of course, notable for playing these type of movies.
Mm-hmm.
He also appears on the Sgt. Pepper's album cover.
What?
Yes, Leo was also meant to appear on it, but he requested a fee if they wanted to use his likeness and ended up not being on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club.
Well,
You didn't expect that, did you?
that's. Is there some sort of Beatles connection, or is it just,
No, but if you look at the album cover, it's kind of like all of these strange characters. You have everybody from like Mae Young to, Aleister Crowley.
Oh, I've never really looked that hard at the Sgt. Pepper's cover or so.
Well, and another thing that's, kind of interesting about it too, you have to consider is like, so obviously the East Side Kids isn't necessarily something that everybody would just know now.
Mm-hmm.
But considering the sheer amount of successful movies and shorts that were made with all of this stuff, it's not inconceivable that the Beatles even, had seen these flicks or grew up with them.
Maybe had a little bit of cultural significance for a period of time.
Right. Also, this was one of his latest roles, but you might also, if you've ever seen It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, Leo Gorcey plays one of the cab drivers.
Yes, and the credit looks like nothing, this person is cab driver, but the cab drivers are very important in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a mad, 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 mad movie. You should go watch it.
Yeah, you should go watch it.
But I also want to take a minute to talk about Sammy Morrison because he was very interesting. One, because you compared this to the Little Rascals.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he might not be as well known as some of the others because he was a little rascal during the silent era. But he was Sunshine Sammy.
Yeah, I did see that. He might have been the only member of the Our Gang troupe to transition into a East Side Kid, but I think there might have been one or two more who ended up on the East Side Kids,
or some variation of it.
Yeah,
or
well, yeah,
Tough Guys or something.
Because again, like we said, there's a lot of Muggsy and Glimpy and another character named Danny are maybe like the three consistent figures that are pretty much in every movie from start to finish. But there is sort of like a rotating cast of people coming in, or this person was only in like the last two East Side Kid movies. So there might have been different variations involving more of the Our Gang members.
Well, and another interesting thing about our boy Sammy is that he's kind of historically significant a little bit because in 1919 he became the first African American to be signed to a long-term contract with a major studio.
Oh, wow.
And it is kind of interesting. He did vaudeville, rubbed shoulders back then in those days with even like appearing with acts like Jack Benny.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he had kind of a wild ride.
Yeah.
He did not, this was his final film with them. And I don't believe he went on to be a Bowery Boy, though the other two did. And granted, they're not the only three that appear in the movie, but, and I'm not super familiar with the East Side Kids. I did all of this research for this particular movie, but I'm sure they all have varying importances depending on the film, but those three are the ones that seem significant to me watching this film.
This isn't a terribly important comment, but I was actually very surprised that nobody was wearing a whoopee cap or a propeller hat. There was a single guy wearing like a Navy sailor's hat, which, that fit, but this is prime whoopee cap time.
Well, it's for the best because after watching Jeff Goldblum in Death Wish, the whoopee cap has been ruined for me. If you know, you know.
Yeah. I guess real quickly, if you don't know what a whoopee cap is, it's what Jughead from the Archie comics wears. Classic delinquent headwear.
Right. Another important person who's in a very early role in her career is Ava Gardner.
I had to look her up, but that was a name that caught my eyes. Like I've heard that name before, but I don't remember where.
Well, and she was a huge deal in Hollywood. I'm not going to go through her whole filmography because we would be here all day, but some ones that I picked out that were notable that she was in included The Killers, Barefoot Contessa, and Showboat.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
In fact, I believe this was a Monogram Pictures movie, but I believe she was on loan at the time from MGM. Now, granted, she wasn't a big star yet. I think this might have been like her third or fourth film, which, nowadays you might be a veteran actor at three or four films, but they just cranked them out back then.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean like low quality, though some were, but I mean just if you were a director, that meant that you were on the set filming every day,
Well, I said they cranked out the East Side Kids movies. I don't have any exact documentation, but I did see some figures of they probably filmed these in 5 to 7 days, and
Actually, this one was filmed in exactly 6.
6 days. There you go, and probably had a budget of something around
And
$30,000.
probably had about the budget of a ham sandwich.
Probably had a budget of $10, and somebody pocketed the other.
You're right. Yeah, no, this isn't like William Castle low budget. This is like micro budget.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're paying attention, you'll notice, like, especially early on, there'll be cuts that, somebody will be in one place and then, they're either holding something and it's gone, or, just little things like that. They were really just, nobody's gonna notice. Let's just keep filming.
Well, for the record, I didn't notice.
I mean, and for what it is, I mean, who cares?
Right.
It's fun.
Well, and it's not that important for this kind of movie.
No.
One more actor I want to talk about was the actor who plays Jack, Betty's new husband. He was played by Rick Vallon. He's another person who I cannot begin to go through all of the movies he was in, but know that there are a great deal of westerns and war movies, and he had prominent roles in many of them. Nothing with any silly monsters, though. Sorry, guys.
Well, speaking of somebody who was in movies with silly monsters, let's talk about Bela Lugosi, because he's very important.
So, real quick, too, before we get into Bela, did you know this is actually the second time East Side Kids have had a run-in with Bela Lugosi?
So I saw that there were at least 2 movies, but I didn't know if this was the first or the second.
This is the second. The first one was made in 1941, and I believe it was called Spooks. It wasn't Spooks on the Loose. That was the alternative title for this one. It was Spooks Run Wild.
It's close enough.
Could you blame me for getting him confused?
Yeah, no. But, and I'm gonna guess he was, I don't know if he was on loan, but he's definitely, this movie kind of reminds me of those low budget, like, direct-to-video B movies where they say, like, we have this famous actor, like, we have John Carradine in this, and then John Carradine's in like 5 minutes of the film and then is not.
Yeah.
Bela Lugosi is in more than 5 minutes, but he's not in this
He's
movie.
used sparingly. In fact, I think my biggest criticism of this movie is they could have done a lot more with Bela Lugosi, or more with even the ghosts, haunted house theme in general, because it kind of gets discarded pretty quick.
Yeah.
That's not to say I didn't enjoy it or that wasn't funny, but I think that there could have been more haunted house shenanigans, and there certainly could have been more Bela Lugosi. Now, if that name doesn't necessarily ring a bell, that surprises me, actually. But he is most famous for being Dracula in the Universal Monsters. He's the original. He's also played Frankenstein, various mad scientists. He's been in just tons of movies.
So, Bela Lugosi was born in Hungary, and he dropped out of school and became an actor there and did mostly stage stuff. Then World War I happened, and he actually fought for Austria-Hungary and actually rose to the rank of captain and got injured on the Russian front. Now, this injury, unfortunately, would lead to his morphine addiction that he developed over time.
In his late career, he'd be one of the first, if not the very first actor to go into rehab, or at least publicly.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. But after the war, there was a revolution in Hungary, and like communism for like a brief period took over, and so he fled and went to, I believe, Germany, and actually acted in some silent German films before coming to New York, where he did stage acting and then was in the stage production of Dracula which I think that was 1927, which was so good that he was then put as Dracula in the 1931 original Dracula.
And kind of the rest was history from there. I mean, though he kind of regretted being typecast, Dracula really did make him.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since one thing that might be lost on viewers today, especially if you're not familiar with all these things, is just what it means to have like Bela Lugosi on your poster. So nowadays, if you ask like people like, what's scary, they might think of a movie or they might think of the character in the movie, whether it's like Jason or Slender Man or whatever. But back then, like, that it's supposed to be spooky because it says Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's spooky.
Yeah.
Boris Karloff is spooky. You know what I mean? It's less just the character, but like the actor themselves is very much associated with the horror,
Mm-hmm.
So,
And actually, he almost wasn't in Dracula because I believe the first choice was Lon Chaney, but Lon Chaney died, so...
Which was very selfish of him.
Was very... Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lon Chaney.
But the 30s was the height of Lugosi's career, but he, like you said, that name is associated with horror, and so he got so typecasted that he was never able to break free. And so in the 40s, his career started to go downhill, and he got his addiction to morphine really took off, if you will, and then the 50s, he was relegated to doing Ed Wood movies.
Right. Well, and then I think there's one more person we should talk about, and we should talk about the director.
Yes.
I don't suppose you know how to pronounce his name.
Not a clue. I have no clue.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a swing at it. So the director was William Bodine? It's spelled...
It might be Bodine. It just might be a strange...
It might be. He might. I didn't look at where he was from, but that would strike me as maybe if he's from Louisiana.
I know nothing about Louisiana, so
it's spelled for you people listening. It's spelled Beaudine. You figure it out.
We'll say Bodine.
But he had an insane career. He started with a few silent picks, so his career starts in 1910 and it doesn't end until the 60s. It's been estimated that he has directed maybe somewhere over 300 some films. I've heard numbers as high as 350, though. That can't completely be trusted because that's going to include, I think, shorts were thrown in there and other things. But he did TV, movies, and he was not necessarily a high art director. He was that guy who give a shoestring budget and he just pops stuff out. And he did several of the East Side Kids movies. He did several of the Bowery Boys movies. There's no point in trying to list all of the movies, but here were some that I thought might be of interest to our viewers. Some of his work includes The Ape Man, Billy the Kid versus Dracula.
I've seen that. It's not good.
And one that I've not heard of, but am intrigued by, Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. Featuring Bela Lugosi.
I like how it's very specifically a Brooklyn gorilla as opposed to an African gorilla, perhaps.
Well, and that just goes once again to show you how, actors were kind of associated with their role even after they left it because, it doesn't have to be some sort of character. It's just Bela Lugosi. You know what kind of movie it is now and you want to watch it.
Yeah.
You want to see him meet a Brooklyn gorilla, I guess.
It's like Curious George, but for the 40s.
Right. I think he also... Now, granted, the Billy the Kid one was like at the very end of his career, and I've heard that described as not a B movie, but a Z movie.
Yes, sir, it is.
I believe there was a spiritual sequel, perhaps, called Jesse James Meets Frankenstein. So, he's really doing that monster Western mashup.
Imagine giving a Z tier movie a spiritual sequel.
Well, I say spiritual sequel not because that's how they described it, but because it's a Western. You take a Western outlaw, throw in a monster.
No, there's no way that the two, like, somebody didn't see and steal from the other.
It's real. It's an underutilized genre. The historical Western figure meets a monster. I think we should get in the movie business and make 30 of them.
Yeah, we should pump them out for $30,000 and do it in 6 days each.
There you go. Now, we should probably get back to the movie. There's just so much interesting stuff to say about the cast. Well, you want to share your thoughts first? What would you like? What would you dislike? What were the high points?
Well, an interesting thing about this movie is that the main antagonist are like a Nazi propaganda spiring type thing. And I had a weird sort of connection to this because I really like old radio shows, and one of my favorite shows is The Green Hornet. And I noticed looking up the East Side Kids, there's a little bit of a connection in that the Green Hornet, he started out like he's always fighting like racketeers and gangsters. But then America enters the war, and then all of a sudden he's just fighting like hundreds and hundreds of Nazi spies.
You know, the same thing happened to like Batman.
Yeah.
There's lots of serials, I believe, of Batman out there fighting Nazis. Everybody was fighting the Nazis.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that happened to the East Side Kids. They went from their antagonist being like stock, like thugs and gangsters or just like bad people to, wow, there's a lot of Nazis and East Side Kids keep running into them.
Right. I mean, Bela Lugosi's doing Nazi stuff in the suburbs right there.
So that was just a interesting little thing, but I think my favorite bit is the opening gags around them setting up for the wedding, particularly how they keep stealing from this dead guy on like unintentionally.
Yeah. No, they get like Blimpie's suit. They get from they borrow it from a guy who has like a mortuary.
Yeah,
and then they later borrow a wreath, which they later find out was addressed to the guy who was just shot. I think it was like, sorry for shooting you, Lou, or something.
The guy who's supposed to be wearing that tuxedo for a funeral the next day is the one who's supposed to have the funeral wreath.
Right. And then everything Muggs says is funny.
Yeah.
I wanted to list some, but I just get them wrong.
Yeah, no, it's
a joke a minute.
It kind of reminds me of Bob Hope in that
rapid fire.
It's just rapid fire. It takes you maybe a minute to fully realize what has been said.
Well, and he's got good timing, and he's got that heavy Brooklyn, accent he's using in it. It's great.
And there is some good physical comedy in there.
Yeah, there's a dash of slapstick here.
Yeah, and even just some of the more subtle, I did think it was funny. They have the boys singing for the wedding, and they're all standing, but Muggsy is like sitting in a chair, just sort of moving his hands as like directing them.
Very lazily.
Very lazily.
Well, the whole time, the piano player keeps falling asleep, so he keeps kicking the piano player and then like miming playing the piano to get him started again.
Yeah. I also, during the haunted house sections, it was funny to me. In fact, it was funnier than what the actual gag was supposed to be. But like Glimpy sees a portrait of Napoleon, and then it flips and Napoleon now has his coat off. Or it flips another time, and now Napoleon's just in his underwear. But what was funny, really, to me, is the fact that these Nazis had set up a portrait with 3 different paintings of Napoleon.
Well, there's one scene, too, where Scruno is dusting, and he looks in a portrait, and the portrait's moved, so it's just Bela Lugosi, like, there.
Yeah.
And then he does a sneeze that sounds suspiciously like a curse word.
Yes, it did sound suspiciously like a curse word.
Apparently he was doing the Hungarian equivalent of achoo.
Is the Hungarian equivalent maybe a curse word?
Yeah. But I thought that was funny. I also thought it was funny because they think that the haunted house is Jack's house, and they find the propaganda stuff in there. And though they're very disappointed in Jack, they don't know for sure, so they move it to the other house so Jack won't get in trouble, only for that to actually be Jack's house. So the police are about to arrest him, so they're constantly taking it back and forth.
Yeah, they move it there, then they move it back, then Bella and the Nazis move it back.
Right.
They literally steal furniture from Jack's house
to give to Jack.
Yeah, the East Side kids are not opposed to taking and then hoping for forgiveness later.
Yeah, better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yeah, there we go.
No, I thought that was funny. And then the last gag of the thing really gets me. And I think it's funnier now.
I know it really gets you.
So at the very end, they all end up quarantined after all of this, kind of ruining Jack's honeymoon, because from the Nazis, Glimpy catches German measles, which we see as him having tiny little swastikas all over his face. And, like, it's just a dumb, like, gag. It's not, like, meant to be that offensive or anything, but just the way that, like, modern online culture is, it's just like, oh.
Yeah, I've had to hear about the German measles at least twice today.
I thought it was funny. One joke that modern viewers might not get is, so Scruno's the one who saw Bela Lugosi, and Muggs just is like, oh, you've been drinking too much coffee. And at one point, Glimpy's like, where'd you get it? And I'm like, the first time I watched it, I'm like, why, what? And then I realized this was made during World War II, where coffee rationing was in effect. So that's why he said, where'd you get it?
What was funnier to me is then after asking where'd you get it, when Glimpy goes back to work, he just, like, as like an insult sort of diss, says coffee drinker.
Yeah.
But his delivery, it's like, what do you mean coffee drinker? That's not an own. I don't think that was an own at the time either.
Wow, he's just very jealous.
Yeah.
Very jealous of the coffee that Scruno didn't actually have.
Yes. I do have one thing. I did see there wasn't much on the way of critical response to this film other than a single review from the LA Times. They described it as a feeble and cheaply produced bit of unenticing nothingness. Now, I really like that review. However, I don't like that review for this movie.
However, it describes a lot of movies that have come out this year.
I feel like that was such a good burn, but they wasted it on this. Like this, I think you've gathered that this isn't, it is what it is.
Yeah, this isn't about to win any awards, nor did it. But this is an inoffensive, pretty funny hour.
Yeah. It almost feels like they sent her, like, I have nothing else to review and I need to have a bad time, so I'm going to be angry about the East Side Kids of all things.
Well, and this wasn't made to reinvent the wheel, nor was it made to, was this necessarily highbrow. It's fun. Families could watch this.
Yeah.
Enjoy it in an hour. I think most people who watch this will at least laugh a couple times.
You will at least smile and do that nose breathe when you enjoy things.
And that's how I felt when I watched this, was, I think there were a couple parts even within it being an hour that were a little slow when they get away from the antics. But overall, I had a good time with this.
Yeah, no.
I hadn't gone in with any expectations. Prior to watching the movie, I didn't know who the East Side Kids were. Though I had heard of the Bowery Boys. I didn't realize they were connected.
I'd recommend it. I mean, it's literally that hour is just nothing.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I think it's also on Tubi and like 3 other places. It's free. You should watch it.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you enjoy this, I'm sure all of the others are also probably free on YouTube or free somewhere else.
If, we liked this, but if you go and watch this and decide this is your favorite thing ever.
This is your life now.
Boy, you'll never run out of movies.
Yeah. But I think that's all I have to say, unless you got something stored away in your notes.
No, we've exhausted my knowledge and my research. And I mean, it's funny that we've talked so long even for a movie that's just an hour, but I don't think most people are familiar with the East Side Kids these days. I wasn't, so there's definitely a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, I don't think most people are very aware of any media before the 70s.
All kids do
sometime.
today is charge they phone
Eat hot chip and lie.
and lie.
But yeah, that's all I got.
Well, then I'm passing the ball on to you. So we're taking requests. Yeah, I gave you a list of movies that people had requested. I combed through like all our videos because some of these we haven't gotten to in a while. What'd you choose?
I would like to do Rollerball,
Well, I can think of at least 2 people who are going to be very happy.
which will be very different from the last 2 movies we have just done.
Well, variety's the spice of life.
It is free on Tubi, so if you'd like to watch it before hearing our thoughts, you should certainly go and check it out.
But be careful. You don't want to be making any opinions because we might tell you they're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
I know people come here because, we have the objective scoop.
You should probably watch it and then not think about it.
And if you want us to make decisions for you about how you feel about other movies, you should like and subscribe.
Yes, please like and subscribe and give us comments echoing the things we said in agreement.
Yes. In fact, you don't even need to think of your own. You should just type out things that we've said, and we will like it because, well, we're very smart, and if you recognize that, you are also very smart.
Exactly.
This is like BreadTube.
But thank you for listening. We are on, apart from YouTube, we are on Spotify, CastBox, Odyssey, Apple Podcast. I'm always addressing our YouTube audience, but if you're listening in those places, thank you for listening as well.
And you know what? If you're on Odyssey, you leave us a comment too. We'll go over there. We'll check it tonight. We'll make sure that you're represented.
I don't think people even know that Odyssey exists.
It's I checked. We had like 7 views on a video.
Oh wow.
Banger Odyssey numbers.
Our Odyssey videos are doing Iron Man numbers. It's impressive. But yes, thank you, and goodbye.
Would you like to say the catchphrase today?
No, I already said my catchphrase.
Okay, well, then keep it cold.